Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for Across Disciplines with Alia Ali and Tarek Yamani. My name is Diana Abu Ali, and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. For our blind and low vision guests, I have dark shoulder-length hair, olive-colored skin, and I'm wearing a purple sweater. I want to take a moment to ground us, even though we're not all together physically in the same space. As someone representing the Arab American National Museum, I'd like to say that it sits on Anishinaabe land and is located within the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and other indigenous peoples' land, as well as being the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Together, we also uplift and honor the indigenous and diasporic communities wherever you may be tuning in from today. So both Alia Ali and Tarek Yamani, who are artists, Alia is a multimedia artist and Tarek is a musician and composer. They're both in conversation today with one another. Both of them are also working on amazing, innovative projects that the Arab American National Museum is very happy and proud to be commissioning. I personally am a big fan of each of them, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation between the two and to learn new ideas from them, and just excited to see what's going to unfold. Before the conversation begins, I would like to pass the mic to Terry Park, Associate Director of Education and Community Engagement at the University Musical Society. UMS is a great partner of the Arab American National Museum, and we are so grateful to be supporting artists together. So take it away, Terry.
Thank you, Diana. Good evening, everyone. My name is Terry Park, and my pronouns are she, her. Before I introduce the artists, we would like to recognize the many sponsors and individuals who've supported this project along the way. Tarek Yamani's world premiere program for the Spectral Quartet is co-commissioned by UMS and the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Arab American National Museum through a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The Digital Artist Residency and World Premiere is also made possible by the University of Michigan Credit Union Arts Adventures Program, with additional support from the UMS Sustaining Directors, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, the State of Michigan Commission of Middle Eastern American Affairs, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the artist who will be speaking this evening. Alia Ali is a Yemeni Bosnian US multimedia artist. A child of migrant linguists, Ali has traveled to 67 countries, lived in 7, and grown up among 5 languages. As a result of her migrations, she uniquely understands how problems with the translation and interpretation of written language has resulted in the exclusion of particular communities rather than greater understanding. As an artist who exists on the borders of identifying as West Asian, Eastern European, a United States citizen, queer, culturally Muslim, yet spiritually independent, her work explores cultural binaries, challenges culturally sanctioned oppression, and confronts the dualistic barriers of conflicted notions of gender, politics, media, and citizenship. Tarek Yamani is an American, Lebanese, New York-based, now living in Berlin, and self-taught jazz pianist dedicated to exploring relationships between African-American jazz and Arabic rhythms, or maqams. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Thelonious Monk Composers Competition Prize and Composers Platform Commission by the Abu Dhabi Festival. Tarek has been recently commissioned by UMS in partnership with the Abu Dhabi Festival and the Arab American National Museum to write a new piece for the genre-bending Spectral Quartet, which will be premiered next Wednesday, October 27 at 7:30 p.m. as part of University Musical Society's Digital Artist Residency Program with a post-premiere Q&A with composer Tarek Yamani and the members of Spectral Quartet. So now I will stop speaking and I will hand it over to Alia and Tarek. Take it away.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you, Deanna, for such lovely introductions. And also thank you to Fatima, Catherine, and Jacob, who you may not see here, but who put a lot of labor and care into providing a platform and also for us to meet. This is such an honor. This is I heard about this was about 2 months ago, and Catherine had brought this up, and about us being in conversation, and also it was during the same time of of the program being about futurism. But I thought that it's also maybe a good place to start is actually where Terry was kind of talking about it, because you're sort of at the end of your residency, right? And I'm at the beginning of mine. So how does it feel?
Oh, so good. Yeah, I'm done. I mean, I've been done for since a while now, because when I finished writing the piece, for me that was kind of the end of the work. So that felt great, because usually I'm a procrastinator, so I always end right before the deadline. But this time I wanted to change things, so I finished like 4 months earlier, and it felt so good. I'm gonna do this more often.
Somehow I don't believe. I guess somehow I don't. I mean, I mean, I know your music, and I've spent a lot of time also looking at everything that you've accomplished. So I can't really imagine that you're such a procrastinator. But we had this little brief talk, and I guess of course it feels good. It feels like, there's something about nurturing this idea and it coming to fruition. I'm certainly feeling this in this process right now. But as I understand it, the quartet, this is something that you haven't done. Can you maybe just tell me a little bit about the process? I was quite interested when you said that yesterday. that you've never
Right.
done this?
Yeah. I mean, I'm the type who would basically accept any challenge when it's in, especially in the realm of music. I feel like it's the best thing that could happen to anybody, because that's where when you go into the unknown, that's when new things happen, as if you're always dealing with stuff, you're gonna just do things and you've heard before. So it was really a nice challenge, and I directly accepted, and I knew that I would figure something out. But it was very, very challenging process in the beginning, just to kind of discover the instruments, their sounds. I've never experimented with these sounds, like even now, like until today, everything that we've done was virtual. So I haven't sat down with actual
Hmm.
string players and actually heard and tried things while I'm listening acoustically how things are. So I was imagining things, and of course researched a lot.
Wait.
But
Sorry. So the entire residency was virtual?
yeah,
Wow, that's so funny. I actually today I'm working with an amazing team of fabricators, and when somebody introduced someone, I was like, I have to see them because I have to kind of see what the feeling is. But especially with music,
yeah, no,
uh,
it's crazy actually that we haven't met yet, even though I feel I know them so well now. We've spent so much time, and I heard them play. But yeah, I mean, it works. I mean, in this case, it works because I'm composing, so it's fine, and I send them the charts, and then uh, it's not that complicated. What was a little bit not complicated, was the challenge was the idea of them playing quarter tones, like the maqamic sense in Arabic music, which is not just particularly playing the quarter tone. It was supposed to be, playing in the traditional way, where the phrases make sense how we hear them, not just like playing the right note at the right time. That wouldn't make sense in Arabic language. It's about how you get to the phrase and how you phrase it. So,
hmm.
but so that was the challenging part, where we spent more time on and with references and trying to. I mean, they did an amazing job in kind of really listening to the music and trying to speak the language, at least within this particular piece. And I think they did really, really an amazing job. I was really impressed.
So I'm still quite interested, I guess, in the process of it because something that well, first of all, who is they? Like
Yeah, so
what
we're
are their
talking about the
names? Who are
spectral, yeah, spectral quartet. They're Doyle Armburst and Russell Rowland, May Feinberg, and Clara Lyon.
nice, beautiful,
Yeah,
and
and they're,
and
they're one of the most, they're really, really highly accomplished. And, it was an honor for me that they accepted to have me write for them without me writing anything for string quartet. I was like, you took a high risk.
yeah, I mean, isn't that beautiful though? I mean, that's
It
something I
is.
guess that's really kind of amazing, and I guess that's like I guess the juhd that's like sort of that sort of effort that you work up to. There was something that you marked earlier where you were said, the things that and to kind of break out of that comfort zone, right? Especially, I mean, you're so, I mean, it's quite, quite a prodigy, actually. There's so much that you've accomplished. Of course, in awards, there's a sort of high skill, but also balancing very different languages of music, right? And again, like understanding feel. And I think that also has something to do with your sensibility, perhaps also as a migrant, and also us as migrants, sort of having your foot not only in one or two worlds, but in many, right? And
Right.
creating another one. And I think I'm curious as to how you approached the residency, because it's kind of amazing where I find myself today, but how, um, and that this was quite a generous residency, but how was it? Did you propose? Did you say, hey, I would like to do something? I've always wanted to do a quartet, or how did it reveal itself? Or
Oh no, it
what
just
was it that,
came.
mm,
Yeah, it came. No, it just came to me, and a lot of things happen that way. By the way, like most of the things I've done, like they just come knocking my door. Like I don't even go look for them, and that I find a beautiful thing. Like serendipities. And actually, I have to shout out to Catherine here because she is actually the main catalyst. Because how it happened briefly, because I need to ask you questions, right? So, we're gonna say this really
I
quick.
mean, no. Please take your time. Go
Yeah.
for it.
So Catherine, I think discovered my music somewhere, and then she told Mark Jacobson of the UMS, who is the second main cat, who was actually the mastermind behind this. She just told him about my music. He liked it, and he booked my trio for the UMS concert in March, which was the first to be cancelled for Corona. So because we canceled this, and then they came up with the idea to do a digital residency, he thought about this. He was like,
Mm.
"Would you like to write a string quartet for the Spectre Quartet?" And I was like,
Mm.
"Yeah, let's do it." And that's how it happened. Yeah.
So it's supposed to premiere in a week or so, and it's what was the day?
Yeah,
It's on the
next week. So on
27th or something.
27, yeah, Wednesday, next week. Yeah. We can,
Excellent.
in a few here, a little bit about it. I mean, maybe we could like listen to something, and then s- we keep going.
I think we
What do you
should. Why are we talking around it? Why don't we just like go right to
Exactly.
the
Since we're
point?
talking about it,
Exactly.
we talked about it so much. So let's see the fox in action. Uh, so yeah, if we can play the video. I think it's called 3635. Yeah,
Incredible.
little taste, 30 seconds.
Incredible. Excellent. And so you're going to be in your room, you're going to be there
I'm gonna be
while
here.
it's
Yeah,
so wild. It's so
yeah.
wild. Um, yeah, I
So can
mean,
I ask you a question, or do you have? Yeah. Oh, go
let's go
ahead. You
for
have
it.
a question for me?
No, go for, I mean, I guess one of the questions that I was thinking about was just, I spend a lot of time in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, I think jazz, I had the opportunity since Catherine, sort of introduced, this concept and this idea. I was like, how is it that I don't know him? Which is, and it's not that I actually actively listen, to jazz. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in, so I grew up in Yemen, as Terry was mentioning earlier, I'm Yemeni Bosnian. And growing up, my mother and my father would have these cassettes, and the three cassettes that I listened to the most, as I was saying to you yesterday, which I was obsessed with, as well as like my fabrics, were Tina Turner, Ella Fitzgerald, and Whitney Houston. And Ella Fitzgerald particularly somehow opened this other. It was just it's she the sweetest sounds, and through her it became Sarah Vaughan. It became obviously Louis Armstrong. Eventually it became Dee Dee Bridgewater's. It became Herbie Hancock, Thelonious Monk, of course. And I found myself later on living in New Orleans. And in fact, right now I'm living in New Orleans, and all of my work is produced there. And there's something um, about once I got there, really understood, like listening. It wasn't just, to go and just to hear, to listen to jazz. It was really hearing, and you sort of go on these incredible journeys, and it's not just improvisation. There's something that's entirely, it's a completely different language. And so I think about different materials. I guess for me as an artist, working with thinking about now I'm expanding more into sculpture, but also textile, photography. And in terms of music, when I guess a question that I would have is what either language or materials would you say perhaps there was a shift in this residency, or would you say that you work with, or would you even call them like different materials or different languages, or how would you
Look at music, you mean, like in terms of other than sounds? Is
yeah,
what you mean?
I guess
I
you
do,
you said mhm.
yeah, I do see definitely, because it's, the whole thing is vibration, really. It's all frequency, and colors are frequency, sound is frequency, movement is frequency, and we are made from this. So I think a lot about this stuff, and I also think about how we feel inclined or attracted to certain things, why we are attracted to certain kinds of people, why we are attracted to certain tastes. And I do think that our attraction is basically just a harmonious, you know, we just vibe with this. I mean, it's all in the language. We say we vibe with somebody, we vibe with an artwork. That's just because our energies vibrate maybe in harmonious frequencies, right next to each other. But it's so complex because the music is so complex when you're hearing such so many instruments and so many harmonies and rhythms at the same time. And of course, rhythm is the ultimate frequency, right? It all starts from there. So yes, they all come together, and they are all like, I feel like you can take a piece of music, and if we had the technology to decode the ratios of every particular instance, a micro instance, we would get a painting, we would get a dish that we can eat, and we can get even a human that we can love. So
That's quite beautiful.
yeah, it would be great. Very useful.
Yeah, I was like, there you go. That's your next residency right there. Thank you very much. It has been noted. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a sort of something that's been a little bit of not a little bit, quite a strong reaction, because a friend of mine who's also a very talented musician, plays jazz, flamenco, Gnawa, Rai, is from North Africa and from the Maghreb, but also this notion of like sort of when you come to the States, because anything that is not of a particular categorization, something that always became difficult in kind of labeling and categorizing, for example, the CDs or the type of music, is that it would sort of fall into world. Does that make sense? And so I wonder with you, does that happen? Would you say, oh no, I'm purely a jazz artist, or have you been able to carve out sort of a new definition or a new way? Because it sounds, I mean, you fuse music, you fuse
Yeah.
different experiences, different worlds, essentially. So do you face this issue?
No, I don't, but it was a very intentional decision from an early point in my musical explorations, that I did not want to fuse until I really understood the music that I really felt drawn to the most, which was jazz. It really took me in ways that were inexplicable. It was something that, as if it doesn't seem logical for somebody born so far away from this, and supposedly I should be more inclined to feel Arabic music than this, but it was definitely like the calling for me. The point was that my idea was to really understand the music, to speak it fluently, and then let the other part, my let's say original self, sneak in by itself without me having an influence over it, because I believed that would be the only way that the resulting language would be organic, would be seamless, and would not sound like I am pretending to do something that I'm not, or it's artificial. I just didn't want it to sound artificial, and I know how it could sound artificial, and that was something that I wanted seriously to avoid. And so that's how I approached it, basically, by just being really purely focusing on speaking fluently this language, which is Black American music. So yeah, and then it happened. So I feel, yes, I am fusing, but I give the example of speaking with an accent, speaking fluently a language that that is not your mother tongue, but then you know that I'm not a native New Yorker, or it's just obvious for you from how I speak, and you probably could even tell where I'm from just from my accent, even though we can converse perfectly together. So that's the same way that could happen also. And like I joke that I play jazz with a Lebanese accent, but I think but I think that's the best way to describe it, really. And
Yeah,
I think that's the point that like it's a really great point to get to, especially musically, because music, you have to have a voice. What does it mean? Because naturally, if you sing, if you're playing an instrument, it's much harder. I don't think it's much harder. It just happens that it's becoming harder for many reasons, which are beyond this talk. But the point is that if you're speaking, we are all have unique voices, just like we have unique fingerprints. So you will never sound like somebody else if you sing. But if you play an instrument, you could sound like so many other people and not yourself, because people get stuck. Artists, musicians, a lot of them get stuck in sounding like other people and not being able to find their own voice, which singers don't have this problem, right? So how to find your voice? Playing on an instrument that somebody else just played, but then you just, without knowing, you just know that this is this person. This is Herbie Hancock. You just know straight away from the first 5 seconds, why. So there's a way to get that, to use the instrument as vocal cords, not as just a machine that is there, So it has to do with knowing who you are in the end, It's a spiritual, it's really a spiritual, I mean, music is a spiritual, it's meditation, really. So to be able to get to speak with people and yourself with sound frequencies, you have to know who you really are. If you don't, then what you do is gonna not be meaningful to you at the first place, let alone to the people you're catering your music to, or your art in general.
That's interesting, because I think for my experience is quite different. I mean, I think in let's shift into this notion of futurism, and the reason of why, so futurism, I sort of, I initially was not a trained artist. I studied politics with the intention of going into law and actually being a lawmaker. And eventually there was something, I mean, I've always been drawn to making things, to creating things. And I think part of it was also maybe making a comfortable space for myself, actually. It was a way of carving it out. I didn't see myself reflected in museums. I didn't see my stories. I didn't see the stories of my families. I'm not only saying in the United States, I'm also saying even when I was in Yemen, I was a little bit different. When I was in Bosnia, I was a little bit different. And so it was always being sort of on the edge of something, until finally really understanding that, okay, embracing that it's not about being from here or there, that the place that I'm from maybe doesn't actually exist yet. It's the place that I'm carving out. And it became really quite evident to me. And as you're talking about this being sort of, Black American, Black US music, I think that there's something that resonates with me, because when I was in Cal Arts, I took the one professor that I took a class with in every semester and any possibility, and eventually convince her to be my thesis advisor was with Colleen Smith, and she herself wouldn't call herself an Afrofuturist, but she's absolutely a visionary in ways beyond of what I could imagine. And the thing is that she would always she always puts you in your place. And I started sort of exploring, she introduced this notion of Afrofuturism, like, just in this notion of rejecting the history or sort of the present that was basically set, for people of the African diaspora, and creating this really abrupt intervention, as Sun Ra did, for example, and many people after June Tyson, and eventually, creating and carving a new space on their terms. And I was so fascinated about this, and I started looking at Arab futurism. And just for the record, I mean, I'm really against the notion of Arab futurism. I mean, I think it's quite orientalist and it's sort of self-orientalizing, but that's
You
sort
mean
of
the way it's being done, not the concept or the concept itself?
No, I mean, I think when you're talking about Arab futurism, it's essentially, okay, I guess I don't believe that futurisms exist for people who, and for communities whose futures are not the way that they would like it to be. They're usually drawn from severe traumas, as a way of creating a rupture and a disruption to, if now is a dystopic, or from the dystopian present, if it's so dystopic, then the only thing to tie on to is this sort of nostalgic past. And as futurists, we sort of present radical new imaginations, new realities for the future, even if they're so far out there, but something that so far shifts from what future is set for us, which is out of our control. And it's also a reminder, rather than looking outward, it's looking to each other. And in this regard, and in terms of Arab futurism, I think one of the biggest problems is Arab with a capital A. Who are the Arabs? Are we only talking about the genealogy? I mean, the trauma of a Palestinian and the history is very different from the trauma of an Iraqi or of a Syrian, and certainly of a Yemeni. And so when you're saying just Arab futurism, it's essentially, piling everybody in these sort of in a violent way, and creating this sort of competitive nature, and also, I would say, really numbing the possibilities of what could happen. And so something, and sort of by rejecting that, I started thinking more about, what are the potentials of a Yemeni futurism, and certainly being inspired by people like Sun Ra, but even, and obviously Colleen Smith, but also people like Santiago X, who's an indigenous futurist, Larissa Sansur, who's a brilliant filmmaker. I was sort of drawing from some of these ideas, and when we're talking about materials, and Colleen did a studio visit with me, and she said, be very, very careful not to take from the labor of others. This is where the labor for you as an artist is to create your own. And, to think about, what is it that I draw from Yemen, in order to create these sort of newly imagined ways of looking at things, of looking at ourselves, of sort of presenting these radical, gazes for ourselves, artwork for Yemenis. And at one moment I was actually quite blocked, until I just had to open my eyes and actually not look to the future, but look really deep into our past. And Yemen is so rich, but it's so different from rest of the Arab world, as would be any of these other communities. And so that really marked me in terms of thinking about creating, kind of looking within what we have, how to create something new. with new manners of storytelling, insisting that our, you know, our ways of storytelling are ways to in which to present. And I think about that in terms of what you were saying in terms, you know, with jazz. Um, I wonder how you negotiate that in a very long-winded way, of me asking that. How do you negotiate, you know, being inspired by, you know, what is, you know, what is Black, you know, American music, even if you can say also blues and, you know, and jazz. How is it that you can learn from it, inspire from it, but truly make something radical that is your own, drawing from, so, you know, what you draw from without it? And I guess that's where it comes into that question about categorization, what I was trying to say earlier. I always thought that that was problematic, especially when people are trying to carve out their own sense of music, because, you know, are you still going to be using with the tools that you're creating? Are they the ones that are being created by, you know, as we were saying earlier, like the Herbie Hancocks, or, you know, the Mysalis brothers, or, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's there's a lot to say in this. It branches out, you know, because there's so many elements involved, you know, with but the short, I mean, not that I'm not gonna give the long answer, but in brief, it's for me personally, I don't look at it in that particular lens. For me, it's really about the moment, and that's what this music is. So, and what I mean by that is that I'm of the opinion that the past and nostalgia are mental constructs and memories, you know. So I look at them in that way. So I don't look at myself as I am from this particular place. For me, this particular place, it just happened that I was born there and I have certain memories. But these are memories, so they are mental constructs, because also memories could change. You know, you might think you might remember something in a certain way. So all these emotions that are attached to this particular place are only in your mind. They don't exist outside your mind, you know, because the memories are long gone. The place that you remember and you have a feeling for is probably totally demolished and it's not there anymore. So what remains is the memory, and the memory is with you always, but still it's a mental construct. So I don't put so much attention and so much weight on where I'm from, because where I'm from is already in me, and I don't need to make any kind of, you know, sense about it. I just it's um, it's the experience of the now. What does it mean? It means like it's like you don't have to it doesn't have to pass through intellect. The things that don't pass through intellect, for example, if there's if, somebody gave you something that is rotten, it doesn't have to pass through the intellect to know. You just smell it and you directly know that you should not eat it. So this kind of knowledge is intuitive because it's instant. It does not there's no time in this kind of knowledge. That time does not exist. And it's interesting because we can parallel this with how we make art and jazz. And as I call it Black American music, just to give it to give the people who created it their what's the word, you know, their you can help me
The
out because
acknowledge, like
the
the
acknowledgement,
acknowledgement
exactly.
basically, and
Yeah,
the credit.
which
Yeah.
which was taken from them for decades, and I mean, and still it's not perfect, but that so now it's like it's being reclaimed. It's like, no, let's call it Black American music because that's what it is. And so many people made fame, and I was actually thinking today about this because it reminds me of colonization. The idea, I was making a resemblance between the idea of for example, a white band from the UK, they're playing basically blues, let's say the Rolling Stones. They made all their fame and all their glory from black music while not, you know, giving credit to where this music came from. I mean, it doesn't have to be them, but the idea of taking something, which I found in your work actually, that's what got me thinking while reading about flux and the idea of this what is it, wax resistant dyeing, which is something that I've never heard of before, and I was so curious about this, and I looked it up a little bit, and yeah, and I wanted to ask you something after about the process, but the idea of the colonizers would go to some place, steal this incredibly ancient and immaculate art, and then they sell it back. They repackage it and sell it back. And this happens exactly the same with music, So that's the Elvis Presleys and all these people. They took this music, they repackaged it, and then the audience would not have listened to it if Elvis Presley wasn't Elvis Presley. They wouldn't have listened to it if it was in its original black form, right? So now it was, okay, so now we like it. So this idea of repackaging is very similar to colonization, of taking somebody's culture, making something out of it, and then selling it back to them in a new form, and then the people thinking it's actually new, while it's actually their own thing. But this is where memory even comes in again. It's like we forget that we actually made this, but we take it, we consume it as if it's not ours, and it's such so interesting.
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I mean, wow, there's so much over there, that there's so much there. Yes, absolutely. That's not only in terms of, and I think a lot about what that series is truly about is also the things that we see and what we think that we're seeing. We're seeing, a fabric that is considered African, which is like so problematic in and of itself, right? Just to even call that, because it's like called African, wax print, Ankara, Paksa. But it is actually Dutch. And 95% of that fabric is actually produced in the Netherlands. But indeed, there was a point when they were, when the Dutch Empire was in Java. And there's this sort of there's this wax resistant way of making fabric called batik. And the Javanese, it was invented by them practically. And so the Dutch thought, oh, well, we're going to mass produce it. So here's this like capitalist form. We're going to mass produce it, created a machine, and in order to sell it back to the Javanese. And in fact, the Javanese ended up having one of the most violent revolutions until this day. Every Friday in Jogjakarta and Surakarta, people will wear batik, everybody from school children to the police officers, just as a way of pride. So how beautiful that is, as sort of a fabric that becomes a document that really sort of represents so much, and so much of themselves. But anyway, there was all this fabric that was left over, and it ended up getting picked up on the other side of the empire, which at the time was what was considered, the Gold Coast, which was, in West Africa. And within the very different communities, the Dutch were going in and they saw, okay, well, they're picking it up. And so they started copywriting. And this is where paper, a different type of document, and these sort of colonial structures end up becoming an extremely violent form of erasure, because these, in Arabic, we have this word turath, right? In which, you have these songs and that belong to everyone. Nobody really owns them. They just belong to everyone. It was the same as these symbols that were hundreds of years old. And to this day, actually, one of the companies, which is an offshoot of the Dutch trading company called Velisco, actually still owns the rights to some of these symbols, so much so that designers from those regions can't even use them. So in the work, yeah, I questioned that, but I also tried to sort of shift it in terms of making, getting the distribution that are specifically from distributors and people that are in Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and in Nigeria. and always making that sort of sharing this space and always making that public in terms of like, this, this is who made the work. So who are this is who made the fabric, and then but this is who you can buy it from instead, even though it's more expensive. And it's sort of shifting that economic impact. But also it kind of makes you question, like, who are the people that are sort of hidden in plain sight, that are there all the time, but sort of don't acknowledge. And I think that comes into, into the labor. And I guess like a little bit of a shift to what you were saying earlier, was also this, you were mentioning about, just knowing yourself, and this notion of nostalgia, because I find that time is really quite interesting, especially when you're thinking about futurism, because of course we draw back to maybe what we remember or where we came from. And sometimes the places that we came from, whether or not they still exist, are completely destroyed and demolished and are still continuing to be actively erased. But, we kind of go to what these memories are. But I guess what I was trying to say earlier is that you're mentioning about the memories only of your life. And I'm talking, I think for me, there's something quite interesting about the memories that go even farther than that. So I just recently presented an exhibition. I'd like to read you a letter. Okay.
Please.
So I just recently, let me see if I can open it. Even though I'm sure that, okay. So I just recently presented quite a big exhibition in Paris. The gallery was a very supportive gallery in the sense that it wasn't only about sort of this commercial aspect, but it was also more about sharing experience. And I had the possibility of really kind of taking over the entire space. There were 7 rooms, and Jacob, would you mind maybe sharing the first few slides, and then I'll read the letter after. Okay. Well, maybe while he's pulling it up. So they're different series, and a lot of them are also about this, people being enveloped in fabric, but also who is on. Maybe it's not the people who are hidden behind the fabric, but it's us. And my statement, if you'd like to show the next image, please. All right, here we go. Assimilation is violence. It is to make us strangers to the ancestral knowledge that has run through our veins for centuries. It's the active erasure of our pasts in order to fit someone else's vision of the future. It makes us strangers to ourselves and to each other. We arrive and strive to be like them, only to discover that we can never be anyone else than ourselves. This exhibition is dedicated to those hidden in plain sight, the migrants. It's a reminder of our royalty that once was and still is. The beauty in our color, the poetry in our myths, and the song in our accents. If we are not honored by others, then we have the power to honor each other. My work is dedicated to you, Alia Ali. And so this begins into this exhibition, which is it's called Migration, and you can keep going to the next one. And so the different rooms are kind of entirely on the left. You see sort of these Uzbek ikats, you have the Maasai, but also it's a question of whether or not this is also possibly Scottish. You can go to the next one, please. And ways of really taking spaces and transforming, because even as migrants, we come and, maybe all we have are our memories, but in fact, there's something that's so violent in the act of assimilation. Thank you, Jacob. I think we're good with that. There's something that's so violent in this forced sort of act of assimilation when we come to new places, that we have to forget everything that has run in our veins for so long. And that's when you were saying, it just sort of feels, or like, you sort of know it. well, perhaps, I mean, that's, I think maybe it's because it's been there for thousands of years. And
Right.
an example that I had was I was working again on this film, and I was thinking about, really, rather than looking at my memories, but in order to imagine a future, and really to, not looking at ourselves through our suffering, as Yemenis, but to look through our beauty and everything that we stand for, and that we have, and that we've produced. I also started looking much farther into history, until I could realize I could look so far into history. And I decided to land on 3,000 years ago, during the time of the Queen of Sheba, which we also kind of erased from our knowledge, which is Malika Belqis, whose
Mhm.
throne is in Yemen. And to start thinking that every time that I'd gone to the museums, the Louvre, or the British Museum or the Smithsonian, and the objects that came from her kingdom, from the kingdom of my ancestors, is actually not even marked as something that would be modern day Yemen, but is just as Sabaean, and in many cases were looted. And so there's this fragmentation even that happens, but that's the labor that you go to dig. And I started thinking, well, the farther that I look back, if I can imagine it 3,000 years ago, and really start putting these fragments back together, then surely I can envision something 3,000 years from now. And as a child of linguists, I started listening to ancient Sabaean. In Arabic, we call it, in Yemen, we call it Masnad. And you can see it in my name in the middle.
Mm.
And when I heard it, it's something, Yemeni Arabic is it's different. People will say it's closer to Fusha, but there's something quite different to it. And there was so much that I understood. It was almost like this meaning at the edge. There was, that I could sort of get. And there was an
Is there
incredible,
Sabaean?
sorry?
Is there Sabaean in Yemeni Arabic?
This is called Mesned. So this is Sabaean in English. Is that
Yeah,
what you
Saba.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, like you
Saba.
call it Saba.
Exactly.
So is
Exactly.
there of this language still in modern Yemeni today, in colloquial Yemeni?
I mean, there are actually several languages, but there's not in modern,
There's not on
like
this.
when you speak. No, no, no,
So
no.
when you
But
write your name like this, like, so how did you figure out how to write your name? Like, how did you
well,
find the letters?
well, actually, interestingly enough, is that I learned it this year. I did another residency called the Roswell Artist Residency, which is exactly where the aliens had the landing. And the way that I applied for that was essentially to create a language of the future. So throughout this year, I was learning Hebrew. I might have mentioned it to you. So my Yemeni grandmother is Jewish. I grew up Muslim. The rest of the family was, and even that sort of her the erasure of sort of her knowledge, even in the process of sort of even organized religion and of these like matriarchal stories, very much also like Malika Saba, Malika Belqis. And so, what are the stories that were sort of lost, even that we ourselves actively lost because we forced others to assimilate? So, this year, I basically wanted to pull together the languages of Yemenis. What is it that makes a Yemeni? How could I speak to Yemenis from the future of the future? And so, I drew together Arabic, Hebrew, and Mesned. And Jacob, you can show maybe the two murals.
Also, Masnad is the way you call this language. You call it Masnad.
Yes,
Okay. Okay.
yes.
You
And
don't
so
call it
this,
Sabaiya.
no, no.
Okay.
And this year, actually, can you go to the next one, please? I think it should be the next one. And that's it. And so I sort of integrate them with both sort of visual, moving from photography, but into moving image installation, understanding that it can't only be sort of a single moment, but that our experiences are layered. And with this, it's a sort of I have a lot of control over my spaces, but in terms of this, it's very free flowing and really drawing from, again, these things that feel right. like not, I never painted. I never did this. When I did this mural, it was the first time I'd ever done that. And there was something that just rung so true, very much to what you had said earlier, that there was almost some things, when I sort of sit with them, that they sort of pull and
Mm.
and it
So
kind
this
of
was
comes
painted.
from you.
This was painted.
This is all hand
Hand painted.
painted.
Ah,
Yes.
wow.
And so then this year developing on what do some of the meanings mean? What does it mean to put certain characters next to each other? I know that you speak and read Arabic. So, there's certain ones where you might see like a scene, but there might be like khamsat nuqat, like 5
Right.
dots on it.
Okay.
And so things that are kind of at these edges, and how does it sound? And so trying to start to speak it. Um, and that
So
sort
can
of
you say
drew.
something in the language?
No, not really.
Okay. Okay.
No, I did,
Or
because
just so
actually
curious to
that's
hear how it
I
sounds.
no, but that's actually really, actually, see, this would be the good point to maybe watch the film. But I will
Okay.
say this. I will say this. I was going to share part of my film. It's called Mahjar, but if somebody would like to post it in the chat, people can. I'd rather people watch it in its entirety. It's 14 minutes. And it talks about a Najm al-Ahmar, story that we believe in many of the tribes in Yemen, that we've inherited the Red Star um, from our ancestors, from Malika Bilqis, that was gifted by King Solomon. And then in 1997, when NASA sent the first Pathfinder to Mars, three Yemeni tribesmen tried to sue NASA for invading the planet that we inherited. And so I sort of use this as, it was really mocked in the news, but I use this as this point of departure. And this sort of led to the project that I'm working on here. You can go to the next one, actually. And so this is this portal, essentially these spaces. I've done them in 4 different places. And each time the language develops. And I guess the point is that when I started speaking it in this film that kind of talks about the Najm al-Ahmar, there is a section where I do speak it, and it's more, again, I think it's about feeling, and I think you might find it interesting because it's about how do we bring specific sounds together that tries to draw on all 3 languages.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be something, and this sort of really led to the work that I'm doing here at the Arab American National Museum, which is honestly probably the biggest gift. It's not like as I'm sitting in the residency, but it's probably the biggest gift that, and kind of indescribable possibility that I could have never dreamed for. And when I was proposing, I'd propose things, as you mentioned, like things that maybe I felt comfortable with doing, like the action of doing, upholstering, projecting, doing sort of light installation, painting, photography, even if it was on glass. But the actual action of doing something and the entire process of making it, there were several restrictions that I couldn't do those things. And actually, the museum had offered me the atrium, which is the space. Essentially, it's the air. It's the space in between the museum. And I was able to kind of envision, well, I always wanted to make a starship for Yemenis, because if people are so actively, people who consider themselves our brothers, and even that we come from the same descendants, people who are so close, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, but even for me, being of both Yemen and the United States, is actively profiting off of the suffering of Yemen. If Yemenis can no longer move on this horizontal level, then I would like to create a starship for us in which we take back the objects that were looted from our civilizations, from the museums, to kind of reflect ourselves, especially in Detroit or in Dearborn, where it has the 2nd largest Yemeni community outside of Yemen, and to essentially create a museum within a museum that is for Yemenis. And so I'm now in the process of building it, and I shouldn't say we can I'll give you a sneak peek, but this will
Do
be
you,
opening in January.
in January. I wanted to ask when it's gonna open.
Yeah,
In January.
and that's all there's gonna be now.
So can you say what's the material or part of the material
Absolutely.
that you're using?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think before saying that, I mean, this was like an amazing gift because even with the museum, there, Deanna, also Crystal McCall, who has been really kind of exceptional in terms of sort of there's sometimes you just need somebody to kind of believe in you and say, okay, we'll make this happen. And she's been so instrumental. And this project is quite huge. It's made of aluminum. And it's also been inspired by a lot of Yemeni architecture. So in terms of the lighting, how the head sort of functions, along the tentacles, I didn't want to think about something that is phallic. Essentially, I didn't want to think of a rocket as a starship. When I think about migrants moving, we move across water just as we go in a starship, we're on a boat.
Mm.
And several interviews that I've had also in the other film Mahjar, I asked different people who I worked with, like Awad, who one of the people from the community here, what was the last point that you saw in Yemen? And it was from the ship. It was the
Mhm.
ports of Hodeidah. And I think about how we're sort of endlessly traveling. We're voyagers. And so I also look at the spider, al-ankabut as a very sort as baraka. And so what is the
Mm.
spider? And it was inspired by the glass octopus that's found around um, the Socotra waters, and an island which is now basically being land grabbed by Emiratis, and it sort of is going beyond. Nobody is seeing it, and which is also a death of another language, which is Mahri,
Oh wow.
unfortunately. Yeah, and we don't know because we don't know what's at stake because we don't see Yemen through its beauty. We only see it through suffering and as people as victims and as criminals and people that need to be saved, when really people don't acknowledge that so much of our present would not be the same without many of these civilizations like skyscrapers, coffee, just to name a few, frankincense, myrrh, and so on. And so
Right.
this is a way of taking back everything that was ours. And
Yeah.
so I hope that you'll come and visit it. But I have to say on that note, the team is really huge. It's larger than what I've worked with, and it's this kind of amazing honor that people believe in it. So I've tried to keep it as much as possible as, based out of Detroit, because I think it's important that once we get money, as artists, it's also a responsibility to make an economic impact within the city. So I'm working with this brilliant fabricator and artist named Juan Martinez, who's now also really collaborating on these ideas of material. And so that knowledge and the trust. Kevin Specht, who's making, who's doing the sound and the engineering. Wang Chi, who did the 3D rendering. Yeah, so the team is growing. Katie Dresner, who's doing the it's been quite fun. And again, it's that when it goes back to when you were talking about the quartet, there's that intimacy that you just are all in it together,
Right.
And so
No
it's
fabric. So there
amazing.
won't be any fabric in this piece, right? Would that be
No,
your first work without fabric? I mean, apart from films, haven't you always worked with textiles, or it hasn't been like
no,
this? Okay.
no, I've been working with paints, and I've done it also, but in most cases, yeah, it's been with, I mean, I guess for me, it's not really so much fabric as much as it is with the motif. I
Mm.
think about like how motif or like the capacity and the potentials that patterns kind of can hold not only as a document, but also as a form um, of camouflage, but just sort of paying attention to what is being said, especially from cultures that are oral cultures, which are sort of ignored and yes, actively erased because their histories were told by their colonizers, when really just because they may be illiterate in reading and writing, it doesn't mean that they don't document, like my grandmother, for example, they're extremely fluent, like you were mentioning earlier, being super fluent in music. They're extremely fluent in the notion of making, different types of fibers and textiles um, and so on. So, but I just noticed the time. So it's like 7:11. I don't know if we want to open up to some questions, and
Yeah,
we could open to
but
some questions.
yeah, we should. I just have maybe just a quick question. In your Flux series, I'm just curious. So, do you like design, and then you print on this? Because it seems to me like it's 3D. Is that a visual illusion, or it is 3D? Like when we see the shape of the human, let's say, there's a shape of a person, it feels it's outside the frame. Is that correct, or it's actually just
Thank you for
could be.
saying that. I mean, I guess that's the intention, but I think for me, when I'm looking, all of my work actually, the way that I choose, every point. I mean, we're going through this right now as we're making El Falaq. Every point, everything is a decision. And as I was sort of kind of I became suddenly I was like a photographer. So people started kind of acknowledging me as a photographer. I wanted to be very conscious of this idea that, first of all, I don't want people to reflect themselves. Alia Ali is this, brilliant thinker who kind of talks about the possibilities of a photograph being many things. Roland Barthes talks about it. It could be either a mirror in which someone reflects themselves, or a window into another world. And I wanted it to be a window, but two, it also becomes a social contract. It's a document. And when you think about the camera, not only verbal language has been this is actually not only this tool, it's a weapon that's used against particular communities. The camera absolutely is. You think about this famous photograph of this green-eyed girl in Afghanistan that was taken by Steve McCurry. Do you know what I mean? Do you know this one?
I don't know this now.
It was a picture of the National Geographic, and I think if you saw it, it's quite an iconic one. And I remember seeing it as a child, and kind of they'd always, like, it pops up again, and now with everything in Afghanistan, like, it's popping up again. And and many photographers, particularly even Magnum photographers, like, they'll come, they parachute into a place, they take a photo, they capture photos, they shoot photos, and these are really, really violent words, and that's exactly what happens in every photograph. The person who is always there but invisible is the photographer. And yet the photographer is the one who makes all those decisions.
Right.
And so it's a way of holding back, there's that privacy, but also it really frustrates people, kind of who's there. And I think there's that notion of also reminding that that's why there are these enveloped, the frames are enveloped in this textile, just as, it is a representation of what that fabric is. And I think that even a frame becomes this border. So how do you create this sort of illusion? And not only illusion, but there is a sense, that there are people there, because when you think about it, there are people, that are all around us, even when we think about the hands that have created what's around us.
Right.
Exactly like what you were saying earlier. You might be listening to a song and you're like, wow, I love it, but do we really think about the labor and the experience, and sometimes even the trauma that has had to be overcome to make something that beautiful for us to enjoy?
Right.
So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that.
And on that note, it also sums up the idea of, like, by the way, I agree with you about the memory that it goes I wasn't talking about the memory just of our lifetime. I was talking about the whole memory that stretches back in, probably to infinity, but it's still the same concept applies in a way because it's all in you anyway now, and you take it wherever you go. You know, so the like what I'm saying is that it's a perspective of looking at time because time is shifts. Time is not exactly the same in every reality. So it's based on how you look at time, how you would interpret the ramifications of things that are affected by time. You know what I mean? But that's of course
I'm
a whole other
I know, but
whole
I'm,
other
I
dimension.
can't leave it on that one. And the only reason that I cannot leave it on that one, because the only reason that I would have to say is that there is this, especially, migrants who come, um, and who are forced to sort of erase for their children, for example, this sort of assimilationists. And I know many, friends whose
Sure,
parents
sure.
were like that, who are like, change, make sure that your accent is really strong so that where you come from disappears. Why? Because your body, your accent, your experience is a threat. In French, the worst word is menace.
Mm,
And the fact that, just for example, just that I speak Arabic on a plane is a threat to someone else. The fact that in France, if somebody wears a kippah or hijab and they're a mother or a father and they cannot accompany their child to a field trip because that piece of fabric is a threat. So we need to try to change, to remove that sort of memory that actually it
no, but
can,
that's not.
a person.
Yeah, but sorry. Okay, keep going.
Oh, I think that there are actually, I think it's quite a it's beautiful that there's certain, and I agree, there's also certain memory that as long as you can, I think art has that capacity to be able to take particular things, memories and histories and heritage, and not only remember them for what they are, but almost walk around it, reimagine it, and
Mm,
sort of pull from it but also shift it. And I think that's where futurism comes into being, this way of carving out through new, and I keep saying that, but also in terms of really creating a space on your terms that is void of colonial bullshit, oh I guess, or like, yeah, colonial, baggage, or even this sort of these active erasures, and even drawing back from, maybe even not speaking, but only allowing, kind of, as you said, the frequencies and vibrations of the languages that have like flown through you, and pulling music from a photo, or pulling music from an artifact that you see at the museum, that you
mm,
can never breathe the same air of it,
right.
because it's, you can never be tied to it. But at the same time, imagining it in the future, I think it's really powerful. I'm so happy that the museum is doing this, actually, as, you know, I think it's quite, yeah, radical. So, um, should we open to some questions?
Sure.
Are we allowed to open to questions? It's 7:19.
I guess we have one question. What was it? How is this voice you found a path to healing and liberation for yourself and our communities? Hi, Shireen. Uh, I'm not sure I understood. How is this voice you found a path to healing?
Can
Um,
you read it again? I'm sorry. Well,
do you see
Hoya,
the
it's
chat?
not just for you. No, I can't see it because I'm on the
How?
phone. We were having
Okay,
some,
so
yeah, sorry.
that's the question. How is this voice you found a path to healing and liberation for yourself and our communities? I feel there's
Oh,
some uh, maybe a word that is wasn't supposed to be there. Did
I mean, I think I understand that. I think I guess um like how, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically I'm understanding it in the sense of, how have we found a voice in, like, or may perhaps has it kind of been this way of healing, and of liberation. And I guess my answer would be like, it continues to be, it's not that. I guess there's also this, it's so funny. I was talking to someone, actually to Juan today. We were going, doing errands, and I was like, you know what? When you have, there's something about being, of the diaspora, migrant, BIPOC, and there's this notion of having the responsibility to 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 respond to things that come from the community, from your community. We don't have the privilege of making just like white male art, like, I just went to Marfa and I saw.
Oh, we lost you for a second. There's, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Can't hear you. We lost you. We cannot hear you. Maybe then I'll take it from here. How is your artistic language liberating? That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess it's by default liberating just because it's artistic practice. It's like it's like asking how is spiritual practice liberating? That's it. That is its function. Like it functions as to be something that liberates you, and you do it because you want to be liberated. So, and I really feel there's a very close connection between spirituality and music making, especially when it's improvised. Alia, you can hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. So Shireen clarifies, how is your artistic language liberating? So I was saying that this is like asking how is spiritual practice liberating, and it's kind of the same thing because by default that's the function of a spiritual practice. Like you do it because you want to be liberated, because it is that it is liberating from centuries and millennia of practice of from oral tradition of people who did something that we know that works because it worked for so many people in the past. And of course there are so many different styles and ways to achieve a certain liberation, but the end result is pretty much the same. And so yeah, that's how I feel about artistically, and it's about what makes every artistic method, let's say, or skill unique is the person doing that thing. That's when they add their own voice. And if they don't find their own voice, of course something is going to be lacking. That's like somebody meditating for you in a way, and then because if you only hear about it and you never do it, then you're not going to get the results. But once you start doing it for yourself, then you start investigating your own uh, uh, makeup, subconscious makeup, and that's where liberation start to happen. So I feel it's very much the same thing.
I guess for me, like maybe in a shorter answer is that, whenever people ask me about what inspires my work, at one point I thought about it a lot, but I think it kind of remains the same, and it's rage. It's pure rage. And I think it's one of the reasons I thought that I would go into law, because I wanted to, there was something that I wanted to change, to try to change, until I realized that something like law is absolutely about manipulating language. And if I did it, it would be in English probably. So it'd be my colonizer's language, which I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing. And it's about finding one truth. And in art, you sort of have these multiple access points. It's not about raising, giving answers. It's about raising a lot of questions. And so I think there are certain things that I try to address, that I try to parse out from my own history, things that I find really fascinating that I am somehow drawn to. I think Tarek, you mentioned that there's something that you're drawn to and listening to that instinct. And in the process of making it, turning something, I think the most powerful things are like turning something really difficult or something hard or something traumatic, perhaps, into something beautiful. And and sort of digestible, but something kind of braver and something that can produce these sort of intimate conversations. I think, and to just create a shift. I think any work, including music, poetry, if you can create something that other people, once they experience it, once they leave it, have had a shift, then there is how that expansiveness, I don't know if I would call it liberation, because but I would say there's an expansiveness in terms of having more radical thought. That was a beautiful question. Thank you.
Yeah, was really. I think we should pass the mic, but I feel like we need another hour, because that by itself, like this last thing you just said, I would go on with this because it's really interesting. I have a little bit of a different way to look at it, but I guess next time we can expand for more.
I'm gonna be in Frankfurt next week.
Ah, nice. Frankfurt.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Let's try to meet in the middle.
I'll message you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much,
Thank you so much.
for
So
being here.
we're gonna call Diana back.
And thank you for everyone who organized this.
Thanks, Tarek. Thanks, Alia. Just listening to this conversation was so rich, and I'm really, the different topics you touched upon, from like just working collaboratively but remotely in your respective residencies, to talking about the liberatory and radical aspects of futurism and even art, the colonial impact and commodification of artistic and production and craft. I mean, this has really been, can I come with you to meet you in Frankfurt or Berlin or
yes,
wherever?
Please.
Listen in on the second half. This has been really wonderful. And I'm really happy that our museum and UMS were able to bring you both together. And, I'm glad you now are in touch, you're talking, maybe something will come out of this sort of connection in the future. So thank you both. And thanks to Terry for the introduction, of course, the teams at UMS and the Arab American National Museum for making this happen. As a reminder, the digital world premiere of new work by Tarek Yamani, performed by the Spectral Quartet, will take place Wednesday, October 27th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern at ums.org, with a post-premiere Q&A with Tarek and members of the Spectral Quartet. It will also be available on demand and free of charge with registration at ums.org through Saturday, November 27th. So, and please keep an eye out for work in progress updates from Alia Ali's installation at Falak, that's set to open in early 2022 at the Arab American National Museum. To learn more about our museum and to welcome the future with us through upcoming hybrid performances, workshops, and our film festival exploring this theme of futurism, please visit arabamericanmuseum.org. Thanks again to Tarek and Alia. Thanks to everyone who listened in, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Have a good night, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.